I'm so excited to do this episode. I've followed your content for a long time and read your book. I love to come up with a unique question for each episode. I've started doing that recently. In your case, I was thinking about something that overlaps kind of the traditional 9 to 5 work that I come from in education with the idea of being a digital creator, an author, and someone who publishes content online. I think a really strong overlap is the topic of teaching. If I chose one word, the idea of teaching comes to mind. But a lot of curriculum might be a little bit old school. I know the things that you teach through the work that you do are incredible, but I'm really curious if you were to just pick kind of one topic, if you were to create a course that, let's say, every high school kid in the world, college-aged youth in the world could take or had to take, what would be the thing that you would love to teach?
I love this question, Justin. Thank you so much. So I might need to workshop the name of this class that every student in the world would take, but it would be the topic of embodied creativity. And what I mean by that is learning what it actually feels like to allow creativity to come through you and then manifest into some type of tangible creative project. So instead of just relying on kind of a mental construct of our creative projects, we would bring in a mind, body, kind of spirit orientation towards creativity with the aim that from then on, those students, those young people would know what it actually feels like and looks like to create from a place that's really intrinsic inside of themselves, which I believe will give them a lifetime of confidence, courage, self-belief, and empowerment to really create anything that they desire.
I love how open-ended yet specific at the same time it is, because I heard the words intrinsic and manifestation and that lifelong ability to create from within. If we could bottle that and sell it, we'd A, be billionaires, but B, we would change the world's mental health for the better, no doubt. So I really appreciate that. I'd love to ask about some of those specifics, because there are some pretty big words in there that we hear a lot of times, but can mean different things to different people. Especially manifestation comes to mind when I hear that. I know I heard Conor McGregor, the UFC fighter, talking about it once, and he was like, you can actually think of a parking spot and you pull into the car park and the parking spot is there and stuff like that. And then you hear people say, well, if you want to be a millionaire, you need to manifest it. That word gets thrown around a lot. So as you're using it, what does it mean?
I'm really glad you've clarified this, because the way I used it just now in that sentence is actually way more tangible. So like to manifest something is just to bring something into form. So of course you can lean on one end of the spectrum, which is manifesting your dreams and trying to bring something really big that doesn't exist yet into form. It also could be the manifestation of an IKEA dresser that you've assembled and you put all the pieces together and it's manifested into form. So I use that in a sense of, we would take these students through this curriculum so that they could go from idea to tangible thing. So that might be the manifestation of a book, or the creation of a documentary, or of a ceramics set. You know, those are all forms of manifesting an idea into form. And I actually caught myself when I said that word, because I know that word is so loaded, and I try not to make it seem like this esoteric, really out there kind of concept. But literally, we manifest every day. When we make our food, when we finish an assignment, when we have a conversation, we are creating something that didn't exist from before.
I love that. The idea of podcasting, to me, there are like no wrong answers. I would probably, I don't want to piss anybody off, but I would probably be willing to interview Joe Biden and Donald Trump in back-to-back episodes. And then like we can all learn from those different moments. And so either end of that spectrum is awesome. I just really appreciate the clarification, because a lot of times I get feedback that I'm interviewing experts. So someone who's really done something for a really in-depth period of time, you know, in your case, let's say authoring a book, and being able to avoid the cursive experience and knowledge and break things down for beginners is something that oftentimes gets in the way. And so that's one of the things that I find myself doing a lot, is kind of just circling back to little clarifications and things like that. The other thing I was going to ask was, when we think of like the scope of a project, what would be an example? So book, documentary, ceramic set, that makes complete sense.
Yeah, I'll just add, so that this ideal dream course that I could be the teacher of, that it would be such a gift to be the teacher of this course, would be project based. So every student would be working on a project while they go through this practice, while they go from the start of the semester to the end. And at the very end, there's like a showcase where everyone says, I made this and I made that. And it can literally be anything. But the idea is that we develop this belief in ourselves that we can really have an idea of something we want to create, which I know, like as a young person for myself, I was overwhelmed with ideas for what I could create. And then we would actually go through the process of bringing it to life, so that you can share it with others and you can touch it and you can refer back to it, which is one of the really cool things when you make something tangible, is that it's this asset that you can continue pointing back to, of like, hey, I made this really cool thing, go check it out, which for a young person helps with applying to colleges or applying to jobs, or building upon that one skill and making more things. So there's a real identity change when we successfully create a thing, because then we really see ourselves as creatives.
What would the timeline of said course be? Not necessarily because it has to fit into like a traditional school box, but let's just say, like, if you just got to choose what the best timeline is for this project to go kind of from beginning to end, what do you think would be ideal?
I would want it to be a full calendar year, and I would want to map it onto the 4 seasons, because part of my work, what I've studied, is how creativity happens in cycles, and that there's 4 main aspects to a creative cycle, and they mirror the energies of the 4 seasons. And so there's like the early spring phase of experimentation and curiosity and kind of playfulness, not fully knowing what your thing is going to be. Then in the summer phase, there's a commitment, there's a clarity, there's more action. You're actually building it, you're executing on it while talking to more people. The autumn phase of the creative cycle is you're refining, you're iterating, you're taking feedback and applying it. You also start to look at, well, what has been done and starting to celebrate that progress. And then the winter phase is really stopping all action and being more in a reflective time. How did I grow during this process? What did I learn? Who am I now that I've created this thing? And what comes next? And I think it'd be really beautiful to do that over the course of a year, so that we can actually learn from nature simultaneously, depending on where people live and what the seasons are like in their home turf.
Now, that's a year-long thing. Sounds incredible. I'm also really coincidentally aligned with it, because I started a book, and I'm really much in line with that, whereby I'm going to have a lot of time to really commit to it in the month of July. And then obviously the fall, it's going to be exactly as you just described it. However, I hadn't thought of it. So I think it was somewhat coincidental, but maybe there's something bigger at play in terms of my book is taking that exact timeline. I also know that something that you were kind of built a reputation on and became popular for was the idea of creating your first book really fast. So the idea of having a book done in 5 days versus 365 days is quite a big difference. So how do you hold those two thoughts in your head?
So as more context, the book that is out right now, that is available, was written and published in 5 days, which was part of a friendly challenge. My friends challenged me to do this, and I considered it like a sprint of, let's get out the gate, let's run, let's see how far I can get in 5 days, and I'll publish it no matter how far I get. That was a pretty radical time frame. It was obviously very short, very intense, but in the macro view of the book, it actually was still very much, it's its beginning phase. So I'm in the process of improving the book, expanding it, approaching indie and traditional publishing as a possibility of getting it out there in a bigger way. And so when I think about the entire life cycle of this project, that 5 days was kind of like the start of a marathon where I hit that first lap really fast. And now I'm kind of like cruising and I'm just trotting along as I embark on the other stages of that cycle. But nothing's perfect either. And it's, of course, not every project maps on perfectly to the 4 seasons or for a calendar year. And it's really more about looking at what phase of each what each phase asks of a creative project. So that beginning phase, the term I was operating under when I first wrote it was ship, quit, and learn, which means get it out there as fast as possible, learn from that experience, or quit the experience, like back off, and then learn from it and decide what to do next. That is a very fast cycle in and of itself, but it still embodies the early energy of a creative cycle where you're like, you don't really know what's going to happen. It's very experimental. So it was only because I did that I then learned that, whoa, this book is really resonating. This term has legs. I really want to go deeper into it. I learned about myself in the process, like, hey, I really like this process. I think I could keep this going for a while. So now there's like a natural maturation that's taking place, but it's part of a much larger cycle. And so really we have like cycles within cycles. So you writing the book might be one big cycle, and then editing might have its own. And then the promotion, once it's actually out in the world, might feel very different. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
It does a lot. And we're very aligned because I think it was like 15 years ago, I was published in a teacher magazine about the idea of PBL, project-based learning, and how I had turned my 8th grade class into a company instead of teaching English. We just
that is cool.
Built a business. Yeah. And you can learn reading, writing, media studies, and oral communication by building a business, clearly. So it's kind of that idea of head fake learning inspired by Randy Posh, rest in peace. And currently, when I work with youth, it's always starting with their interests in mind first. And we do a lot of woodworking, a lot of art, a lot of things like that. The reason I started this podcast, started working on building this whole brand, was because I was noticing that a lot of them would either struggle with clarity on what they even want that project to be, which is a huge kind of coaching, supportive, finding yourself, being in a safe space thing that would be hard for us to go into detail and be helpful with right now. But the other thing was, even once they find it, they just so much trouble getting started. And I think there's a lot of dream blockers that get in the way. There's a lot of maybe productivity pieces, but I wanted to show them that those cycles are somewhat predictable. If you want to be a hip hop artist or you want to learn to paint acrylic on like sneakers, you can do any of those things, but you have to go through kind of this process of trying things first. When you went to write the book, you mentioned that it was a challenge from others. So maybe that external pressure helped a bit, but what else did you experience in terms of going from, hey, I'd want to be an author someday, to actually taking the leap and doing it? For someone else who's maybe frozen with not taking action, what do you think could be helpful to keep in mind?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really can empathize with that feeling frozen, having this great idea that you really want to do, but then something inside of you gets stuck and you just, you freeze up. That's a really hard place to be. And there's a lot of reasons why we freeze up. You know, we can go down that route if you want to in this episode, but basically, like, let's imagine that we are there. We're in that frozen state with an idea. What do we need to do first? We need to come back to a sense of safety inside of ourselves, that, you know, maybe that idea started getting outside of our comfort zone. We started feeling like, I'm not the one to do this, or, you know, imposter syndrome, who am I? This is too complicated. Maybe feeling the overwhelm. A lot of times we think of the whole idea right out the gate, and then it's like, it's too much for us to hold right in the beginning. And so we do freeze up. It's like asking to eat the entire giant pizza all in one bite versus just taking one bite at a time kind of thing. So really we need to just come back to a sense of like, you know, I'm good. I'm good in my body. I'm good right here with where I am in my life. Not needing to feel the pressurization of like, I have to do this thing right now, but kind of just bringing some ease into our systems. And then like re-relating to the project in a new way by breaking it down. So really like, it almost feels boring at times, but we want to break our creative projects down into the smallest steps possible, especially in the beginning while we are learning a lot of new things, while we're trying to develop a new identity as someone who can create the thing. And what I found in my own process and what I write about in the book is that I think a lot of people dream up a creative project that's like way outside of their comfort zone and their current scope of talent or knowledge. And so we just freeze up in that process because there's too much newness in it. And so wanting to break projects down into what I called an 80-20 talent ratio, where 80% of your project is already like in your wheelhouse, you've got it, you've done it before, you know exactly what you're doing. And then the other 20% can be brand new things. So that way we are still expanding our comfort zone, we're learning and we're growing, but we're also able to like get stuff done and feel good about it. So I would say like the project itself in our relationship just needs to be reworked a little bit. Like the strategy of how we approach it needs to be reworked to find the space where it feels good and comfortable again.
Are you familiar with the, I know there's so many different ways it was described, but the many pots study, like that there was a college professor who assigned two different groups, a control group where they were told to do very similar, like you're going to create a project and you have to make this ceramic pot and hand it in at the end of the term. And the other group was told a different story that they had to make a different pot once a week for the entire term. And the whole idea is that by making many pots, we always end up making the best pot anyways, because of the statistics, as opposed to kind of holding our breath and being very perfectionist-y throughout the entire term and then having this one big project at the end. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, but it makes a lot of sense because that one pot, that's a lot of pressure.
Right.
You get one shot, you know?
Yeah, that idea that exactly. You got one shot, you're saving up for it. You're probably procrastinating too, where the others didn't have a choice to because they were just pumping them out. And then eventually they have to pick from the one of the 25 that they made to submit. And then the other person had just thought of all their design and all their things for that one. So as you were sharing the idea of the project, I was thinking about the difference in that study and how it would be really cool to do like version 1. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying about with your book as well.
Yeah, I literally call it V1 when I talk about it online. I also refer to it as the MVB, which stands for minimum viable book. So you'll hear MVP, minimum viable product, in like the startup world. And I thought, well, why can't I just do that with books, even though I've never seen anybody ever do that before? And what was cool is that, you know, humans, there's probably some principle here. I don't know the name of it, but we will fill up as much space as we're given. So if you're given 6 months to create one pot, you'll take the whole 6 months to create that one pot, which means you'll probably end up creating it in month 5 or month, you know, the last week or something, versus just like this continuously like getting it going and having all these like micro goals. One pot a week actually shortens each of those goals. So you're not even really focusing on 6 months of pots. You're focusing on 1 week at a time. And for the 5-day challenge of my book, like I didn't have the luxury of stretching that project out. So having a really condensed container to ship a book made it so there really was no time for perfectionism, for self-doubt, for overthinking, which is why I actually leaned onto my audience on Twitter to get some crowdsourced feedback, especially around the cover design. Because I was like, my brain doesn't even have the bandwidth to figure out how to write this book, let alone do the cover design. So I was asking basically the public, what do you guys think? going with the top answers. One woman, even I have it right here in front of me. One woman took the time to write out and draw on a piece of paper an improvement of the book cover. She mailed this to me, so this is the real copy.
That's cool.
And I went with hers because I was just like, yes, that is good enough. Let's go. And I think when we are creating, it's really healthy to be in that energy of that's good enough, keep going, versus no, I'll keep refining until forever. And there's a time and place for that. There's a time and place for editing and iterating and refining and fine tuning, but it is not at the beginning of a project. Yeah. And so I think for most people to really help with like creative dysregulation symptoms or any of those blocks is to bring it in and start iterating, start with that V1 and then like take a step back, go to V2, take a step back, go to V3. If you follow any like major filmmaker or music artist or anyone who we're seeing their polished, finished product, what we don't see are the years and years of trial and error and experimentation, where their stuff really wasn't that good. Like my first book is not really that good. There's some typos in it. And, I edited it with an AI editor. Like I'm not afraid to say that this book is okay. I think it's pretty good for being written in 5 days, but in the grand scheme of literature, like by no means is this book even that good. And it was good enough to get out into the world and it already helped people, which was a real paradigm shift for me, where something that's averagely good is helping people. I didn't need to wait for excellence before I could help people. And that feels really empowering as I continue, refining it. And eventually the book that will be out in print, I imagine will be more excellent. But in order to get there, I had to start with this first project.
It's a constant reminder that I had to give myself for this podcast alone, because I look at some other shows that have really nice studios and maybe even a film crew and like a whole bunch of like high powered cameras at different angles and the ability to just ship the show to the editor. And next thing you know, it's posted and you just have to interview more. And I can really relate to that whole process of being able to ship a little bit faster with each little project you do. I think confidence is the right word, or maybe being able to just lean in with some bravery in the face of fear and stress around being a creator anyhow. I'd love to talk about some of the more details of like publishing a book and stuff like that if we get to it, but I want to make sure that I kind of prioritize a couple things. And one of them is the idea of becoming an entrepreneur when there are so many different career paths. I guess is probably the most important step to talk about first, because again, that whole group of people who often tune into the show are like, should I go into this field? Should I go into that field? And they're usually pulling that from something like a high school guidance counselor, a family member, or a book that the college puts out saying this is what you should do. Now, in my experience, even interviewing people who have been entrepreneurs since they were like 15 on this show, they don't like bash traditional work per se, but I love hearing people's opinions on maybe things that you've learned in figuring out that path for yourself that, of course, people have to learn for themselves, but that could maybe help them avoid some of the same mistakes, or like some, if you would have done things differently, like that kind of chatter. What are some things you would say?
Oh man, do we have enough time for me to answer this question? Yeah, I love this question. And I think I've been an entrepreneur at heart since I was young. Always had ideas for innovative products. I was inventing things from a really young age, trying to put stuff out into the world. I tried launching my first business when I was 19. And at the same time, I was very much not just encouraged, but pretty much forced into traditional work by my mother. And that's because at the time, for me, I was a teenager in the early 2000s. Like we didn't have digital creation. That wasn't a world yet. And so to actually be an entrepreneur at that time meant probably going and getting angel investment in VC and having a brick and mortar store or something very traditional. So it was very wise of my mom to say, like, no, you're going to go get a job. And I'm going to have a lot of different ways of answering this question. On one way of saying it is I actually love that I went down a traditional work path. I learned so much. I wish if I could go back in time that I would have had better mentorship about what jobs to pick, because I just sort of fell into hospitality and restaurants and being a waitress because I'm very friendly and I'm quick on my feet. And then I worked in hospitality in the hotels, and I was a concierge, and I worked at Disney World and Marriott. And those were all great experiences. But in hindsight, I didn't learn a lot. I was actually just kind of leaning back into my natural tendencies of being friendly and smart and easy to work with. And I wish that I had challenged myself more in the comfort of an organization with a paycheck and health insurance and all of that. One of the pathways I wanted to take, and then I actually became creatively afraid of the path, was to go down into 3D animation. And I really wanted to work at Pixar because I went to a performing and fine arts high school and I was a dancer, but then I found that I randomly had a love for the digital arts. And I was the only woman and dancer in the 3D animation department. And I was like, this thing is so cool. I want to work at Pixar. It was right when Macs were getting really big. And then I freaked out because I was like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life behind a computer, which is really ironic now as I'm a digital creator. And I didn't pursue that path. And only recently I've been reflecting on how much more I would have learned working at Pixar or something in that industry instead of being a waitress for close to a decade. So instead of just following a comfortable paycheck and leaning into where you're already talented, I think the beauty of getting paid by somebody else and feeling that level of safety and security is that then you get to grow and learn and have mentorship and work on teams and do really cool stuff. So there are amazing companies these days, and I know company culture is it's transforming a lot, and hopefully more and more companies are starting to care more about the workforce and mental and emotional well-being and whatnot. And so as long as the company is aligned with your values, I would recommend most people start out in the traditional workforce as long as they feel like they're growing and expanding in that. If you get complacent and apathetic and you're literally just collecting a paycheck, then I would check yourself and see, how can you get that aliveness again in terms of learning and creating and growing along with other people. The path of entrepreneurship is lonely for a lot of people, especially as an online creator. It's usually just you until you can afford to hire people and then you kind of build a team. But it's one of the things I miss the most is working in groups of other people towards a common objective. And I wish I had that in my life more. I'm kind of doing it on the side as I pursue musical theater, but professionally, it's something that I don't really get very much. And I've had to piecemeal it together through masterminds and groups of friends and kind of just having buddies along the path with me. And yet I know so many of us are entrepreneurs at heart. And ultimately we want to spread our wings. We want to create new things for the world. We don't forever want to be employed by somebody else. And so I really see it as like a yes and I wish that I had been a little bit more risk averse in the early stages of my entrepreneurship journey, because I just sort of left traditional work and then went to go start a company and put it all on my credit card, which was then a recipe for eventually needing to file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And I don't recommend that at all. My first panic attack and anxiety attack was because I was $12,000 in personal credit card debt after failing to launch a subscription box company. And a lot of that is because I didn't know what I was doing. I was totally on my own. I had no mentorship and guidance. And so I really can't stress enough the importance of mentorship and guidance along all of our career paths, even if you work inside of a company, but especially if you're a young entrepreneur, because there's so many pitfalls along the way. And so learning from someone else who has walked that path and can kind of forgetting the word I want to say, but just quicken your learning process. And last thing I'll say, then I'll pause, is once you are committed to the path of entrepreneurship, do it when you have some safety net. So either work a job on the side and do the entrepreneur's hustle outside of your work hours. I know that's hard for a lot of people. We just only have so many hours in the day that we can work. But unless, that's just me. I know there are people who, when they are like pushed up against a financial edge, will just like solve the problems and do the thing and they can leap. I personally think that's unkind to most of our nervous systems, and that keeps us in this state of fight or flight, this big stress response. So my way of building now is to do it in a way that is easeful, more gradual, more sustainable. I consider my mind and body health along the way. And I have found the ways to do that for myself in terms of financial support and making sure that like I'm physically good as I build. Which for me also comes from being married and having double income and feeling like I'm on a team with another person, my husband, even though we have two different entrepreneurial businesses. And so it's very case by case specific, but I'd say listen to that tug inside of yourself that says, I do want to create and I want to innovate and I want to make new things. And then also take just a very realistic look at your life right now and say, cool. And so what do I actually need to be able to give myself to that path? And, in the foreseeable 1 to 2 years, what do my finances look like? And just get more realistic with it. The more the numbers are just right in front of you, I think the better decision making that we can make.
These are such powerful conversations, I find, because a lot of people that I've worked with on the really far sad end, have maybe ended their life or gone into addiction and homelessness and some very as serious as they get type things. And I can't help but often look at them and be like, yo, you were such a good painter, or you were so funny. Like you would have made an unbelievable stand-up comedian. But those right-brained activities aren't often immediately or clearly rewarded in society. There's not as clear of a path. I know we're both fans of the book, The Pathless Path. Like that is the only path for someone who's a creative, it seems. And my goal with the show is to create a little more clarity, at least, because a lot of people can't necessarily afford to go pay, $1,000 for a creator MBA course by like Seth Godin or Justin Welsh or something. I can, but that doesn't really help the others. And so that's what I'm trying to kind of navigate with these sorts of conversations. So I really appreciate you opening up and sharing some of those kind of like pretty heartfelt stories, like starting that subscription box, for example. If we told a little more of that story, like I'm just super curious too. What was the subscription box? Why didn't it work? What would you have done differently?
Yeah, great. So the box was going to be called Travel Trunk, and it was going to be a subscription box for frequent female travelers. I was launching it at a time when I was traveling internationally a lot, and I was doing a lot of red eyes and flights and just realizing how dysregulating travel is, and that it was really like a boom time for travel and travel bloggers and whatnot. And so I just thought that there was an opportunity to bring a box into someone's life, like quarterly or even monthly, if they're really frequent travelers, that would have sustainable, eco-friendly, like vetted products to help them travel better. And I made the classic, very, very classic mistake of focusing on all the fun kind of image of the brand. So I invested money into a 99 Designs contest to get the physical cardboard box design to look like a vintage travel suitcase. It's dope. And it was not the first thing to focus on. That was something that could have come way down the line because I never actually validated the concept out in the market. I just wanted to do it. And so I started putting all this time and money into launching it. I rented a co-working space out of San Diego when I lived there, and made business cards and a logo. And it was like, I had the image that there was a business being built, but actually behind the scenes, I had no idea what I was doing. And I happened to meet a woman who had a successful subscription box company. And she said, before you keep working on yours, come help me for a day and shadow me and help me pack some boxes for my box. And she did like a yoga box thing. And I went down to her warehouse and I helped her pack these boxes, and she was missing a bunch of products that were meant to go in the box because the suppliers of those products didn't deliver them in time. So now she's sending out like secondary boxes, and she's showing me, this is how much this packaging costs, and this is what happens when someone doesn't actually get you the product on time, and this is my churn rate, and this is how much I need to come in every month. And she had been doing it for 4 years and still wasn't paying herself a salary. And I saw that and said, what am I doing? I don't want this life. This woman lives in this packing facility, hasn't paid herself in 4 years, feels like constant headache. And so I kind of just walked away. And I call it a failure, on some level, because like I wanted it to be a business. It wasn't even really a viable business yet. But it was my first real attempt at giving myself a creative shot at making something out in the world. And I didn't know what I was doing. And so if I had had a mentor or a guide or someone in my corner that I could have been brainstorming with, oh my God, I would have saved a lot of money and a lot of time. And I probably could have seen way earlier on that this was not a good business model for me. And so there's a lot to figure out in the beginning of who are you and what are your talents and your zone of genius and what do you enjoy doing, which is sometimes different than your talents. We got to find that intersection of your genius and your joy. You have to love what you're doing. And there's a whole philosophy of how you actually need to go out in the world and validate and experiment and iterate. And it's slow growth in the beginning. And so if you're doing that trial and error process in the beginning, it's really good that to have like a safety net on the side so that you can do that and feel fine with failing because you know that you're still good. But at that time, I hedged all my bets into it. And that's what led to my panic attack. Because I one day when all the numbers became really clear, I was like, oh, I'm not fine. And I rapidly went and got a job. And I got a job that I hated, doing inbound sales at a telemarketing company. And I absolutely hated it. And I lied my way through the interview just to get the job. And, we have to do what we have to do in order to make it work. But our base level needs, if you go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to know that we have shelter, food, water, that we are good on that fundamental level before we aim for something big and aspirational. I believe we can always have the big aspirational thing, but there's like methodical steps we got to walk to get there.
I'm trying to figure out how to take Maslow's hierarchy and add to the top tiers to be the more specific for this creator business sort of world, because that's exactly what I feel like would help a lot of people. And funny enough, helping them first figure out how to get the actual needs met is really the ultimate first step, arguably most important one, because people end up being oftentimes successful on top of that anyhow. To kind of connect on mutual grief for a second, I still have one big box all taped up of hoodies from my first e-commerce business that I started as well. And I don't need to retell what you just told for the last few minutes because it's the exact same story. It's just instead of subscription boxes, it was really cool hoodies that I see around town and everyone loves them. Every time I see them, they're like, oh, this is my favorite hoodie, but I had to give them all away. So it's reality.
Yeah, and, we hear stories. There are the outliers. We hear the success stories. I think it was Paul Mitchell, the shampoo brand, the hair care brand, where he was slinging homemade shampoo out of the back of his car. Like he'd roll up onto the streets in LA and sell shampoo out of the back of his car. Countless tech startups got created from someone's basement and they were living in the garage and living in their stepmom's house and like really struggling to get things off the ground, and it worked for them. And again, that might still work for some people sometimes, but I do think the game has changed a lot because a lot of people are pursuing their own ventures now. And it's not as unique to say I'm an entrepreneur and I've made this really cool product. And that's not to say like don't follow that path, but I think in today's age, that kind of young, like let's just send it and like put all the eggs in this basket. I just know that there are other ways to build in a way that also just like you feel really good inside. And the people who learn how to get those base level needs met, whether it's through traditional employment or something else, like you're developing a ton of skills that then support you as an entrepreneur. I think the one thing that we have to break from the traditional employment mindset to the entrepreneur mindset is that as a traditional employee, you're pretty much told what to do. And as an entrepreneur, you are not. And so I come from being a very good student, straight A student, where everything you were told exactly what to do. You know, the instructions are literally laid out on every single assignment. And so I just did what they told me to do, and I did it really well. So that actually made it really easy for me to thrive in school. Entrepreneurship, I had to unlearn a lot of it so that I could actually kind of create the rules myself and make decisions without anybody telling me to do the thing. And it sounds easy, but for my system, that was actually really hard to cultivate that. And so I did take entrepreneurship as a class in college. And one of the terms I really loved was intrapreneur. And an intrapreneur is basically an entrepreneurial employee. So someone who works inside of a company, but is innovating and trying new things inside of that company. And I think that's the bread and butter for the beginning stage of someone's career is get inside someone else's business, get the paycheck, and learn, practice that entrepreneurial muscle inside of someone else's thing. It also makes you just an invaluable asset to that company.
Or you get fired.
Oh, yeah, I guess. But if you're doing it in to support the company, ideally you work for a company that supports that energy. If not, then yeah, maybe you get fired because they just want like a run of the mill kind of human. But yeah, I mean, go for the companies that like celebrate that tenacity.
For sure. And I say this because you hear that story from a lot of, public speakers and people who have now become entrepreneurs who are like, I was a terrible employee. I got fired from my first 4 jobs because like I had trouble taking directions, etc. And that's exactly it. You said tenacity. You also mentioned earlier that one of the things that you would advise people to do when they're going into this kind of job search mode is to make sure that it aligns with their values. You can't guess necessarily what other people's values are or what all the companies in the world are, but as you are a creator, what are your values, or at least some of them?
I love this question. Creativity, for sure. Authentic self-expression, which is, I think, the larger umbrella term above creativity. Me being able to fully express who I am at my core. So my business being a conduit for my own self-expression. That gives me longevity in the game because it gets to keep evolving with me. Nervous system regulation, sustainability. I've gone through burnout one too many times and adrenal fatigue, and I've had too many kind of like physical crashes on the entrepreneurial path that I really now prioritize staying within my own physical limits as I'm creating, which is really easy to override at times. Connection and human connection. So ultimately, everything that I want to create creates more connection in the world with myself and others, between other people, helping link and connect different divergent topics together. And this is coming to mind. I didn't realize this was one of my values, but celebration. Like, I think being an entrepreneur is a way to celebrate life and celebrate what is possible. Celebrate the gifts that we are given to innovate, to see new possibilities, to make those divergent connections. And so, yeah, wanting business to be a form of celebration.
I really love talking values because it's always interesting to know, like, do people tend to talk about them in very action-y multiple sentences, or is it like very single words? And you did a beautiful job of kind of combining those descriptions. When you mentioned the idea, well, first of all, a lot of those things would be very similar to mine. Not surprising, creators, the idea of self-expression and, pursuing work that you're interested in. A word that comes to mind as you share all of that is, I know a couple other creators who really are in that kind of like multi-potentialite bubble where they're like trying to just help people keep it together and not burn out while still being able to pursue their own self-awareness and manifest, as you said at the top of the episode, things into the world that are very true to themselves. That is my number one struggle as a creator and an entrepreneur. I could go into if you ask follow-up questions, but either way, it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for a lot of people to not necessarily have like a super, super, super specific niche, right? So how do you think of that idea of like those values sound quite creative? So what has your experience been being able to turn it into a sustainable business, let's say this time around, when that can be a big challenge?
It is a total dance. It's learning how to narrow in to the degree that something becomes effective out into the world, while keeping it spacious enough for me to personally feel interested and engaged, and like I have room to be myself, and that I can even evolve within that space too. I learned this the hard way. I guess all of my previous ventures were way more niche and narrowed focused. The big one was that for about 2 years, I was building a sleep coaching business. And in about 18-month period, I became a sleep expert. And it was like 2018, right before sleep became kind of like the big health topic. And I saw that wave coming. I think that's one of my gifts. I can kind of see what the next big like cycle that everyone's going to get all hooked into. And I was really focused on that's a good opportunity. So I'll put myself there. And I had enough, still in my 20s. So I had like enough fight in me to just like barrel through and become like this niche expert. But after about 2 years, I had a full identity crisis and was like, I don't even care about this topic anymore. And I was just getting traction. I was like, man, I'm really in this for the next 5 to 10 years if I wanted to build a business that I had ideated and strategized and all that. And then my identity crisis took place and I said, I can't be this person. I'm way more than this. And I just had to walk away. And I learned a lot. And so that kind of forced me to really reckon with myself of I am many things. And one of those things is an entrepreneur. So how can I create a business that supports this wild kind of ever-changing person that I am? And although I never sat down to strategize this, which makes me trust it more, kind of niching into creativity gives me a lot of room to play, so much room to play, to the point where I feel like it is refined enough and focused enough where if I say I'm a creativity coach and I teach about creative dysregulation and I host these workshops and I give talks and whatnot, that like people can identify and see themselves in it. They'll know if they're a customer for this. And I can talk about it from almost like infinite angles, and I can approach it in infinite ways. That keeps me continuously engaged and involved. And so like on the side right now, this isn't integrated into my business, but on the side, one of my personal passions is becoming a singer and an actor and getting into musical theater. And I do have like a 10 to 15 year goal of producing my own musical, which would be a business venture, but it's so far out of my wheelhouse right now that I'm just viewing it as like a side passion project. And over the course of the next decade, I aspire to learn to the degree where I can reasonably produce a musical. And that will still fit under the umbrella of creativity. And so it takes a lot of self-inquiry, I think, for someone to really understand like, who are they and do they work better with a refined focus or more of a broad focus? Because I do think some people do work better with a refined niche. On the esoteric side of things in astrology, I have 4 planets in Gemini. It makes me a very versatile, ever-changing kind of being. And that's just been my own creative project to try and figure out how to build a business around it.
What do I have as Scorpio? Or do you know? I
really don't know anything other than my own signs. Yeah.
Because I don't know my own. So that's also an awesome place to
I know
be.
that like the scorpionic way is like the tail strikes. And so it's really this kind of like hot striking energy that's like very precise. Take that for what you will.
I'll Google it. Or Chat GPT.
You can ask Chat GPT. Yeah.
Jinx. Where on a podcast. I know that is something that you, speaking of being multi potentialite and multi passionate and all of that, like podcasting is something that is also at least a small, maybe large interest of yours. I'd love to talk about that topic a little bit as well, as
Mhm.
meta as that is, being on a podcast, talking about podcasting. It's something that when I started the show, like it was a little more rare, and now kind of everyone has a podcast. But I think just like there are so many authors, I think that's a positive thing. It gets used in a negative light a lot of times, like, oh, we don't need another podcast. In any case, as a host and like creating your own show, it's something that you do as well. What has your experience with that been?
Yeah. Before I answer that, can I go back and tag one more thing onto the previous question?
Of course, always.
It's burning. Great. One of the things I love advising people on and walking them through is discovering what their through line is. So, the multi passionate, multi hyphenate person, there is a through line through all the things you love, and probably multiple through lines that tie it all together. And it's usually under the surface, it's not very explicit. And so, the goal is to unearth that and make it explicit. And when you do, I found that it actually started touching on kind of this idea of like, this might be my purpose. And like, wow, this actually feels like my reason for doing anything in life. It doesn't have to right at the beginning, but there's a sense of comfort when you find what those commonalities are and kind of the thing that is always just like intrinsically going to want to come from you. And mine is living at the intersection of authentic self-expression and secure attachment, which another way of saying that is it's safe to be myself out in the world, and to thrive as being myself out into the world. So even the sleep coaching business, which may not feel connected to that at all, the tagline was wake up to your true potential. Like ultimately, I was life coaching people through the door of sleep. I wanted them to improve their relationships, their health, their well-being. I wanted them to feel a deep sense of purpose because that helps you sleep better at night. And I just was like, I walked them through the door of bad sleep and then like showed them this whole other world about like how to transform and become themselves. And when I found my through line, it just felt like anything was possible from that place. And so I really would encourage people. This is something that, takes years of excavation, but people also might intrinsically just know. But as like a thought experiment, look at all the things you love, look at all the things you've done and all the things you want to do, and just see like, what are the commonalities here? They could be words, could be a metaphor or a story, and just play with that. See if you can journal it through.
Yeah, you mentioned a Venn diagram earlier of people finding their clarity between joy and zone of genius or skill set, something along those lines. And I was actually going to ask, in your experience, how do you help people figure out what's in that Venn diagram? So it sounds like that through line is like a perfect example of kind of how to bring things together like that.
Yeah. I think some people are more connected to their intrinsic joy. For me, it's been a journey to connect with my joy and what actually brings me alive. And I think that's a symptom of actually being such a great student in school, was that I just got really good at following the instructions and doing a really good job. So I became skilled in a lot of things without ever reflecting back, do I like this? Does this bring me joy? And so even in my own business, I found myself engaging in lots of activities and building a business in a way that aligned with skill sets, but that I was really drained. I had no passion. And I just thought that was the way we did things because that's kind of what school felt like a lot of the time, until I found that 3D animation. And yeah, through some self-inquiry, figuring out, just really tracking myself in any given moment, like, am I having a good time right now? Being in this, we'll pivot over to the podcast question here. Here's the bridge. Being a guest on a podcast is one of the best experiences for me. I have so much fun doing this. And I also believe it's one of my geniuses. Communicating and having conversations and talking about interesting things is both a genius and a joy for me. And there's room for growth there as well. And being a podcast host, asking the questions, I would put it in the same category. doing the back end work of a podcast, of editing and uploading and all that, not my joy, really not my genius either. And so that then I learned, those are things that I could outsource or ask for help on. So happy to. Yeah.
As we bridge over that, I want to make one quick comment too about the idea of the niche piece and the through line and the Venn diagrams, is that when you shared the idea of sleep coaching, it was also something that I've thought of doing with sleep coaching. And the funniest reason why is because I suck at sleep for like 30 years and I'm a big fan of building in public. And as someone who wanted to use like, learning to sleep as like a build in public type thing, I was like, what better chance than to, and I don't necessarily need to coach people, but as we know, a lot of serendipitous opportunities come from actually learning the thing and sharing what you're learning. And then people start asking questions, etc. And I always thought, well, that is a fairly clear thing. That would have been the first thing that I didn't actually have expertise in, that I kind of niched down to. But the other few, I guess golf was kind of like a tiny one, but more so writing newsletters. And then really, really more so was I had a successful personal training business. But in a successful personal training business, what do you end up doing? Much more life coaching than anything else. And recently, Jamie Masters, who's become a friend of mine in the creator space, and I'm really fortunate to be able to chat with her about this type of stuff. She said to me we were logging off the call, and she said, like, promise me you'll stay broad in kind of what you're working on. And the reason she said that was because she knows that it may take longer, it'll take some endurance, it'll take a lot of patience, but that ultimately it's going to work out better, and that I just need to try. It'll take trust, because it would be a lot easier to just be like, I can help you write your email newsletter, and to really spin up an offer for that. And so I'm continuing to trust in the process that things will work out, but I don't have much more than trust as I continue to build in. Similarly, mine is learning.
We really are quite similar.
Yeah.
I've only met one other person who wanted to build a sleep coaching business, who came to me, and I tried to sell him all my sleep coaching, like idea. Branding and collateral. And I was like going to teach him everything I knew. And it didn't work out, because I invested a lot of money into really cool branding for Performance Sleep was the brand. That's so interesting that you wanted to build that. And I also just have to trust that by staying broad, that it's going to work out. And the way I've looked at my current business model is that certain offerings go more narrow. So one of the things I'm doing right now is in July, I'm hosting a 30-day book writing challenge, which is very refined. And I'm super excited to run that, but I know it's not all of what I do. If I was just the book writing girl, I would burn out in that probably within a year, And so it's like having a suite of things that cater to all of your different interests, but are refined enough that people want to do it.
When people ask me on the business side of things, what have you learned about becoming a creator over the last 3 years that you would teach someone else? And right away, that's what I go to right now. Explaining how with ads, specific newsletters, specific pieces of content, and specific offerings, you can niche down extremely detailed and still have that be part of a larger brand. That I did not understand. I didn't see it in any course. I didn't hear it from any coach. I didn't learn that a few years ago. And I really friggin' wish I would have, because that was one of the main things that I misunderstood early on as well, that I got really excited about. For example, I have a specific newsletter that helps people channel their grief, because I've lost a lot of people recently. And for me, I used writing as a way to work through that. And so that's a very specific 7-week newsletter that helps people channel the energy from their grief into starting a project-based writing project. I would have never created that a few years ago, because that's too niche, so to speak. But now I understand how you can create different sort of pillars underneath the big umbrella, as you put it. So I really appreciate that. You mentioned that the editing, the back end of podcasting, etc., isn't quite your thing. So this is why I wanted to, we'll have to run it back and do another episode in the future. But I wanted to talk about that topic at least a little bit, because I think you do a good job as an interviewer, and a lot of people maybe like a through line for this episode has been people are hesitant to leap. I hear people all the time tell me, like at least weekly, I have an idea for a podcast, but, or, and there's so many buts, it's saturated. I don't know how, or, I haven't decided on the title, like whatever. So knowing that we'll only have a little bit of time left, I do think that'd be one other topic to tackle is your experience with podcasting.
I'm going to bring this full circle. So when I hear people say, I want to make a podcast, but, and then fill in whatever comes after the but, to me, that is a symptom of creative dysregulation. That is a external way that the dysregulation comes through. Ultimately, when you want to do something, we do it. Like, I would ask those people, when was the last time you genuinely wanted to do something and you did it? And then like have them go back in their memory and tell you that story and see how much they come alive when they talk about it. Because when we actually really want to do something and we believe we can do it, and our whole inner system is like in alignment and we're like, everything says yes. It's easy. We just do the thing. When there's some type of resistance or blocks along the way, that's when we start making these excuses of like, oh, I can't pick a title, or I get overwhelmed with the technology, or we are actually projecting our own discomfort onto these things, when in reality, all of that is figure outable very quickly. So my first thing is like, what emotion are you not feeling when someone says that? A lot of times it's going to be fear. Like it's scary. It's scary to create a new thing. It's scary to share your voice in the world. It's scary to come out and say, this is who I am and this is what I stand for and this is the topic I want to explore and tell my own life story through this medium, which I think is ultimately what podcasting is. The technology, the name, all of these things, they like support that. But really what podcasting is human connection, very intimate human connection that is heard by strangers all around the world, which is so cool. Like this medium is so cool. But in order for someone to say yes to that, they really kind of got to get clear in their own system and find that conviction, that courage, and the like assuredness that, I'm allowed to share my voice in the world. So that's one thing I want to say. The other thing is, there's a lot of components into actually launching a podcast. So people who get overwhelmed with the big picture of creative work, again, it's just like break it down. Start with 3 episodes. Start with interviewing your friends. Start with, you don't even actually need to know the name of your podcast or write the blurb or anything. I actually, just this last week, I was talking with a friend who's going to do an experiment, 9 episodes of a podcast. He kind of knows the name, but I said, why don't you just go have the 9 conversations? And at the end of those, see what this thing is. Because you're going to learn through the act of talking to people what you're passionate about, what questions want to come through, what the themes are. You'll find the through line from those 9 conversations or however many. And then you'll be able to figure out the kind of the brand and what this is all about. Because you get to choose when it all gets published.
And if your friend is willing, the idea of posting those not on a hosted RSS feed would be pretty interesting, because you could post them to YouTube, you could post them to Twitter, I don't know where he is, but that would be super cool, because then you get to crowdsource the idea of what could this be called. Or if you aren't the type that want to do that, then whittle it down to 2 titles and just ask for feedback. And then you still get to pick anyways and keep the control. But something like that would be super cool. This is where I start to nerd out and helping people get started.
Yeah. So you and I are both build in public people, which is really terrifying, because a lot of folks want that polished, perfect product that they're like, hey guys, I made a thing. Come check it out. Versus like, here's this rough idea that I have. Here's like something I did in 30 minutes to like move it forward. What do you guys think? Which is what I did with the book. Like, I would not have this piece of paper and a crowdsourced cover that rocks had I not built in public. And it also felt easier for me too, because I was like, I'm not alone. I'm getting lots of celebration from people, getting lots of that positive validation. And so there's a lot of different ways that you could break the project of a podcast down to feel, just taking those little steps forward that builds up the courage and the clarity inside of yourself while saying yes to the dream. So instead of waiting for the perfect background, the perfect mic, the perfect editor, and the money to pay that editor, and the right Canva logo design that you pay someone on 99 Designs actually to put, like, don't do what I did with Travel Trunk. Don't go spend a bunch of money for this polished thing that you don't even know what it is. Stay true to the process of it. And what I've been telling all my friends who say they want to start podcasts is, you're not going to know if you love it until you try it. So give yourself an experiment, 1 season, 6 to 9 episodes, and then reflect, which follows that creative cycle thing. Start with the innocence, the playfulness, the curiosity, execute it, and then reflect on it. Step away. And then see, is this something I want to commit to for a longer term? Which is what I've done. My podcast has 9 episodes, and I haven't touched it in a year and a half because something wasn't right by the end of those 9 episodes. I think it has to do with the name. I wasn't quite clear on my intentions. I didn't feel it was taking up too much of my time when I actually wanted to be bringing in revenue. And there wasn't really it wasn't clear. And so taking a few steps back, I got to clarify, what was missing in that round. And I'm just now starting to ideate on the next one. And I feel way more able to put a podcast out there because I had that first V1 experiment, which I know helped people along the way.
Well, for sure. And there's a real lesson in there because I knew about it. Like, I think a lot of people, I just gave this advice a couple of days ago because he was worried about the fact that he's going to be they're bringing a child into the world this year and some different things that are, typical, like legitimate things that come up in our life. They're circumstantial though. So if something's a priority, you can still do it. But anyways, aside from that stuff, I was saying, well, first of all, you're picturing a podcast being like Joe Rogan. You're going to pump out 2 episodes a week for the next 20 years. This again, we've brought it full circle a few times, but you mentioned not eating the whole pizza and just taking a little bite, eating pepperoni off the top. Like in his case, I was like, have you ever thought of creating 9 episodes and never making them again? Because standalone podcasts are super underrated right now. And I think that's another example. It's a perfect way to create a niche and do a project when you maybe want a wider brand. So I could take my 7-day email course for grief writing, make it a podcast and never touch it. But people are going to find it, whether it's through search or they're looking up my stuff as researching for an episode. And so I found your show. I never looked at the dates either, so I wouldn't necessarily have known when one was published or whatever, right? I just listened. So I think that's a pretty cool lesson too. It's interesting because I don't think we have time to bring it full circle one more time, but at the top of the show, I had mentioned that if we talked about writing a book and being an author and writing, that I know that could take us hours. We could do a masterclass on it. So maybe we'll run it back in the future. For now, we can tell people that, well, I don't know if it's full yet or whatever, but either way, that you'll be creating content around the idea of publishing a book in July and that kind of stuff. If the program's open to more people, maybe they could go join the community and stuff like that. But it would be super cool to go deeper on that in the future, because things like how we create almost a narrative arc, even though it's not a fiction book, is such a cool topic. Like, there's so many writing topics. I had written down the fact that you have shared about being really perfect and following the instructions in school versus like, how do we shift our identity? Like, I always do thorough research and never get to 80%, but we get to 20, which is fine. All this to say, because we're going to wrap, I'd love to do the rapid fire questions really quickly. But before I do, is there anything that you would hate to log off and like say, oh, I forgot to mention this or whatever?
Yeah, just, I'm not sure when this is going to go live, but after the 30-day book writing challenge, the containers that I'm probably going to run more often will be 5-day creative momentum challenges. So I made my book in 5 days. You can clearly do a lot in 5 days when you really put your mind to it. And these challenges will be open to any type of creative project. I walk you through the steps of how to fully refine and clarify what your intentions are for those 5 days. But it becomes this container that has accountability, has community, has support, celebration, and you really get that like like the lightning bolt emoji is the one that I keep associating with it, of like, let's just make this like quick momentum where there's no time for perfectionism and self-doubt and imposter syndrome, and we're all there to support each other if any of that comes up too. And then on the other side, you get to see, okay, now what do I do with this thing that I made? And so maybe that is recording your first 2 podcast episodes and getting them up on an RSS feed, or kicking off a newsletter, or building a website, or something like that. And we always have projects that we're kind of like pushing away, of like, I'll write the book someday, I'll make the newsletter someday. And it's like, what if it was during these 5 days together? So just, I'll send you the information to that, and people can sign up. I think the first public one will be in early October.
Awesome. Yes, I'll definitely link that. And I had to laugh. I was trying not to laugh too loud because you're giving such an awesome answer, but you mentioned momentum and these sprints. One of my other failures was starting a membership. It was called Momentum. If I showed you all the branding, you would really laugh, because I wanted to bring people in to achieve all the things we've been talking about for the last hour. And I've always thought that if I redid it, I would do it more as sprints, because I did it as like a lifelong membership thing. So there was churn, and people like would sign up because they wanted to support or they had big dreams, but then they never do anything. And I was like, if I redo this, it'll be as like, hey, we're doing this for like a small moment of time. So that's awesome. I'm sure it'll go really well, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. So I'll do the rapid fire ones really quickly, because I know we got to go. One thing that you're learning right now that could even be off topic from this stuff.
How to sing and what my vocal range is. I have no idea.
We'll talk about that when we talk about writing next time, because I'm really interested in that topic too. One piece of advice for the next generation.
The only person who can give you the permission that you want to do the things that you want is you. Only you can give yourself that full permission.
And if you were to ask me a question, again, it could be on this topic, it could be like something oddly random, like favorite type of ice cream, but whatever. You have a question that comes to mind, what do you ask me?
What did 7-year-old Justin want to be when he grew up, when he was going to grow up?
I love how specific that was, because if you say younger, you make me have to figure out what specific age bracket I'm going in. I think at 7 was, like at 4, it was astronaut, but then by 7 for sure it was NHL hockey player, like being a Canadian / American, but Canadian kid wanting to hold the Stanley Cup and be a professional athlete would be the slightly bigger umbrella. One of the things that I learned from that was that it's awesome because there's transferable skills, because I did pursue sports. And I think things like time management, perseverance, hard work, communication, collaboration are all embedded in that. But one of the things that I wish I would have done differently in not pursuing sports is that it's not an infinite game. I think a lot of the things we've talked about today are infinite games. Being an author, for example, learning to sing, are all things that you can continue to improve for the rest of your life. Playing football and hockey is not that. So I often think, I wish, even golf's a sport, but you can continue to do it until you're 90. So there's certain little things like I'm more on the artistic creative side that I probably might be happy to see my kids if they pursue that instead of like tackle football or something like that. And that I hate to use the word regret, because I really don't have regrets, kind of the cliche, I love everything I learned about football. But it is something that I think about, had I not sunk 50 hours a week into playing football, but I did that into, insert creative act, I might have been a good learning curve for me on the creativity side of things. So yeah, thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And the last thing is, I know you mentioned the sprints that'll be in the fall, but why perhaps, and then where online can people find your work if they want to support you?
You might want to come find my work online to, explore your own relationship with your creativity and to heal, transform any of the blocks that might get in the way of you fully expressing what's inside of you. You can come to my website, kellywildemiller.com. And my newsletter and podcast are under a rebranding at the moment. So all of it will just be linked in my website. And then in terms of social media, I hang out mostly on X/Twitter, which is Kelly C. Wilde.
I think by the time this comes out, we'll be able to drop the slash Twitter. It's not
The
going
slash
back.
Twitter. Someone did a poll recently that I think like hundreds of thousands of people answered, and it was, do you actually refer to this platform as X or Twitter? And like the majority still say Twitter. So it feels like something where they built a platform that is no longer owned by the people who run it. Like the people who are on it feel a sense of ownership, and they're like, no, we're like, we have our own relationship with this, no matter what you do to the branding. I think that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah, it is really neat.
So I think you can call it Twitter for forever, and people will know what you're talking about.
Especially until they change the URL. But it is a really interesting thing, the watching that whole rebrand in general, because it's been such a short timeline too. Like, I don't know, 10 years from now, maybe it'll be a lot more common for people to say X.
That's true. We're still within the year of that happening. It's fresh. But I'm grateful to that platform because it connected us. And I love what you're doing in the world. Just the phrase, just keep learning, is such a mantra that we could live our lives by. And if I could add just keep learning and creating, like, to me, that's just perfect.
For sure. I really appreciate you ending on that note. It means a lot. And thank you for sharing why people should find you online. That almost always stumps everyone, because typically we just ask, what's the link? But like, I think it is really cool to give your elevator pitch as to why someone should go to that link, which is fun.
There's a lot of links to click on in the world. So like, why yours?
Yeah, for sure.
I really value people's time and energy. So I'm doing a lot right now to upgrade the whole Kelly Wilde Miller online experience so that it's clear and concise and there's a flow and it like feels like a good place to be.
Good for you. Me too.
There's a little work to be done to get that all in order.
I'm working on that too. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And, speaking of being respectful of time, I know you've got plenty to do, I'm sure, today. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this, because it really means a lot. And I'm sure it'll be impactful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you. Boom.
Woo.
Mic drop.